we could hear. It was okay, but it was
Right.
not very clear.
Very clear. Right. Let me just connect to can you hear now? Is it okay?
We can hear, madam, but it's not very clear.
Not very clear. Just hold on, please. Is it better now?
Yes, madam.
Better now. Okay.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Right. I think when I close the door, the reception sometimes is less. Okay. I'll share my screen. Did you hear the case scenarios that I was talking about?
Yes, madam. Yes.
Okay. Right. Good. I'll start recording. And it's recording. Okay. Right. So I was just saying about these case scenarios, and yes, then I got on to actually the history of opioids. So you know that opioids was derived from the plant, poppy plant, right? It is extracted from poppy seeds, which is Papaver somniferum, and it has been used for thousands of years to produce various effects in the body, which is even happening now. So people realize that the substances in poppy seeds produce euphoria, analgesia, sedation, and also as a therapeutic remedy for diarrhea as well as cough suppression. So over the years, the in other systems of medicine also they have been using opioids for these effects, right? So morphine, the term comes from the word Morpheus, who is a Greek god of dreams and sleep, right? And it was Friedrich Wilhelm, a German pharmacist, isolated opium in 1805. Some interesting historical point for you to appreciate. So so invention of or the purification of opium from poppy seed is a very important milestone in the development of opioids. And however, it also became a big problem because after the invention of hypodermic needle in the 1850s, the drug abusers started self-administering opioids by injection, and controlling the widespread use of opioids has been unsuccessful even today, because because the euphoria and the tolerance, they go on taking more and more, and with physiological dependence, and this has become a huge big problem, particularly in the West. I think we are also moving in that direction. If some well-known, celebrities, several of them have died as and accidental overdosage. So, a huge problem. One of the main problems that doctors have to manage overdose. So therefore, right. We use this word opiates, opioids. So what's the difference? So opiates refers to compounds which are extracted from the opium poppy, Papaver somniferum, which is morphine. And whereas opioids are the natural and semi-synthetic compounds which are derived from opium, as well as there are entirely synthetic compounds which mimic the actions of morphine, for example, methadone. So we initially extracted these from poppy plant, but subsequently started synthesizing after isolating the chemical compound. Then you can develop these synthetically in laboratories, and as well as you can develop derivatives of those various methylated forms, alkylated forms, and so on. So those are called opioids because they look similar to opium, but they are not opium, but derivatives of it. So opioids now are several types. For example, mu receptors, which are located in the supraspinal and spinal sides, which are responsible for most of the analgesic effect of opioids. At the same time, apart from giving the desired analgesic effect, it also produces unwanted effects like respiratory depression, euphoria, and then it reduces the GI motility, which is an advantage in patients who have diarrhea, but it is a problem when a patient is given the drug for pain relief. Also produces sedation, and of course, if you are giving it regularly, then it produces dependence. All these are through the mu receptors. And so most of the analgesic opioids are mu receptor agonists. Then we have kappa receptors, which contribute to the analgesia at the spinal cord level. And they also may elicit sedation and euphoria through kappa receptors. And as a result, it produces some unwanted effects. Dysphoria means that is your mood, various changes in the mood. Euphoria means mood elevation. Dysphoria means differences in the mood. It can vary between even going into depression. So kappa receptor stimulation does not apparently contribute to the dependence produced by opioid receptors. Then we have delta receptors, where against the binding site for endogenous peptides, and probably more important in the periphery, and again also contributes to analgesia, dysphoria, some of the delusions and hallucinations which some people might get with opioids. Then there are sigma receptors, where here the binding is not limited to opioids. It's the site of action for certain psychomimetic drugs, other psychostimulants. They also act on these sigma receptors, and these receptors are not antagonized by naloxone. Now you will learn that naloxone is one of the opioid antagonists which we give, for example, in opioid overdose. But sigma receptors are not antagonized. And there is central excitation due to sigma receptor action, and patients can also, people can also get tachycardia, hypertension, and hallucinations because of the action through sigma receptors. So if you take the opioid receptors and the type of actions, this table gives the various effects at various receptors. So the mu receptor, there are subtypes, mu1 and mu2. I think you can just afford to forget more. Just remember that most of the mu2, the actions are coming through the mu2 receptors, except mu1 has analgesic effect. So mu2 receptors stimulation gives rise to analgesia, respiratory depression, euphoria, then GI motility reduction and physical dependence. Kappa receptor stimulation, analgesia and dysphoria. Delta, analgesia and euphoria. And sigma receptors, the mania and hallucination effects. Right. So this is a diagrammatic representation of opioid receptors. You might remember from the pharmacodynamic lectures that we did in the foundation module that opioid receptors are G protein coupled receptors, right? Which means that linked to the membrane bound receptor, there is a G protein which produces a second messenger, and the effects occur through the second messenger. So the endogenous and now I was just telling you that we have these receptors in the body because there are endogenous substances which act on them. So we have endogenous opioids, the dynorphins, enkephalins, endorphins, endomorphins, and nociceptin. So these are endogenous molecules which result in relief of pain. So these receptors, these endogenous ligands bind to the opioid receptors. So this when they bind to the G protein coupled opioid receptors, there is activation of this G protein. I'll come to that, what happens with the ligand binding. So when any of these ligands bind to opioid receptors, it results in reduction of the adenylate cyclase enzyme, inhibits the adenylate cyclase enzyme, which results in reduction of the cyclic AMP. Now, when that happens, in the cells there are also other channels like potassium channels and calcium channels. So that results in potassium ion efflux, right? That potassium ions go out of the cell, causing hyperpolarization, and there is reduction of the calcium influx, right? When the calcium ion entry goes down, that results in inhibition of the neurotransmitter release. So when there is reduction of the neurotransmitter release, there is that impedes the neuronal firing, and that results in pain relief, because when there is pain, nerve endings are stimulated, that results in increased neuronal firing, and that's how we feel the pain. So when there is reduction of neuronal firing with reduction of the transmitter release, there is sensation of pain. Although the pain is there, you don't feel that much. So you can see here morphine combines with the opioid receptor, and that results in reduction of the cyclic AMP concentration. That results in going out of potassium ions through the potassium channel, and that also results in reduction of the entry of the calcium ions through the calcium channels. So therefore there is reduction of the potassium ions as well as reduction of the calcium ions, and that results in reduction of the neurotransmitter release. So when the neurotransmitter, that is the nerve activating, stimulating neurotransmitter release is reduced, which results in reduction of the pain sensation. So again, another diagrammatic representation. If you remember your pharmacodynamic lectures, the G protein coupled receptors have 7 components in the transmembrane component, and there's a G protein coupled to the receptor, you can see here, and that results in inhibition of adenyl cyclase here, resulting in decreased cyclic AMP, decreased intracellular calcium, and decreased potassium due to potassium flux, and therefore decreased release of neurotransmitters. So therefore, as a result of this action at cellular level, so that is what happens at the neurotransmitter cells. So that results in the physiological effects. What are the physiological effects? The perception of pain is altered as a result of both a direct effect on the spinal cord, because spinal cord mu receptors are stimulated, and then there is modulating peripheral nociceptive input. So that is input from the pain nerve endings, that also is modulated, and then activation of the descending inhibitory system from the brain stem and the basal ganglia is also activated. So the whole pain sensation pathways are affected as a result of opioid action. So the opioids are classified by origin. For example, so I told you there are natural opioids. So natural opium alkaloids are morphine and codeine. And then there are semi-synthetic opioids. Those are diacetylmorphine, which is also called diamorphine, which is heroin, which is the substance which is most commonly abused. Folcodine, again another semi-synthetic opiate, and synthetic opioid, which is pethidine, also referred to as meperidine, that's the US term. Then there are other substances like fentanyl, methadone, dextropropoxyphene, and tramadol. So these are the synthetic opioids. Then opioids classified by potency. That is depending on the degree of agonist activity and the amount of the drug. Potency is the amount of the drug that is required to stimulate the receptor or bring about the action. So strong agonists are the drugs which give a higher effect at a lower dose. So drugs like morphine, methadone, fentanyl, pethidine, oxycodone are coming under that side. They are classified as strong analgesics. Now, this lecture here is, sometimes titled as strong analgesics because opioids are strong analgesics, and all these are having strong analgesic properties. Then there are weak agonists. They are opioids, but the action is more weaker. So their efficacy is less as an analgesic. For example, codeine and even tramadol is considered as a weak agonist. Then there are drugs which are having mixed properties of agonist and antagonistic properties. That is a drug which are called partial agonists. So those are the ones which are having agonist antagonistic properties. They stimulate the receptors partially, or you can say they block the receptors, preventing another full agonist from acting. So the examples are buprenorphine and pentazocine. And then there are full antagonists, that is they don't have any stimulatory action, but they prevent the drugs from completely, other opioids from acting on the receptors. For example, naloxone and naltrexone are complete antagonists. Right. Let's now get on to the individual opioids. So first we'll take morphine. So morphine is the most widely used opioid, and it's the gold standard against which other opioids are compared, right? So you compare the efficacy of other opioids against morphine. So what's the mechanism at the receptors? It activates opiate receptors. And remember, morphine has high affinity for mu receptors with varying affinities for delta and kappa receptors, where it has action in the brain, in the spinal cord, and in the peripheral nervous system also, right? So brain, spinal cord, and peripheral nervous system, opioid receptors, mainly high affinity for mu receptors. And when it binds to opioid receptors, it decreases the release of substance P, which modulates pain perception in the spinal cord, right? You learned about substance P for physiology. So it modulates perception at the spinal cord level, so decreases the release of substance P. And also, morphine inhibits the release of many excitatory neurotransmitters from the nerve terminus, which carry nociceptive stimuli. So if the nociceptive stimuli are reduced because of inhibition of the release of excitatory neurotransmitters, that also contributes to action of morphine, right? So these are the mechanism. This is the mechanism of action of opiates that occurs as a result of binding to opioid receptors. So this is given here. in this diagram. So activation of the opioid receptors decreases calcium, as I told you earlier. Calcium influx and decrease the release of excitatory neurotransmitters such as glutamate, right? So when the opioid receptors, morphine binds to the opioid receptor, right? Reduction of the cyclic AMP, reduction of the calcium, and pushing out of potassium, and then there is the excitatory neurotransmitter glutamate release is reduced, so that results in reduction of the pain. Then it also activates the opioid receptor. I told it increases, the efflux of potassium, and that decreases the response of the postsynaptic neuron to the excitatory neurotransmitters such as glutamate. So the glutamates, exciting the neurons will be also reduced. So therefore, all these actions contribute to the how opioids stimulate, opioids result in reduction of the pain. Right. So let's look at some questions and give me the answers. See whether you have been sleeping or you have been listening. Regarding opioid receptors, most clinically used opioid analgesics are selective for kappa opioid receptor. True or false?
False.
False, madam.
Yeah, false. Yes, I said that. We said that they are mainly for mu receptor stimulants, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. Good. Then they are channel link receptors.
False.
False, madam.
Yeah. False. Yeah. We discussed. Although, so remember, although there are you send out potassium and then prevent calcium ions entry, they are not channel link receptors. They are G protein coupled receptors and not channel link receptors, right? Okay. Then stimulation results in efflux of potassium ions from the nerve terminal.
True.
Sorry?
True.
True. Yes, true. We that. Stimulation increases intracellular calcium ions.
False, madam.
Yeah, false. Release of neurotransmitters is reduced after stimulation.
True, madam.
I said that is also one of the mechanisms how it brings about pain relief. Okay, good. Right. Let's now talk about pharmacokinetics of morphine. So morphine has good absorption when administered from the oral route or from any other route also, particularly from gastrointestinal tract. But one problem is that there is significant fast metabolism, right? The bioavailability can vary anything between 16 to 68% between, allowing for individual variation. Average is 30%. Okay. So therefore, you can see, I'll come to that in a moment. Subcutaneous, therefore, we use often subcutaneous injection because that bypasses the oral route, and therefore variation in the bioavailability is not there, and we can have predictable response when you give it parenterally. It rapidly enters all body tissues, including fetuses of pregnant women. So that is why we don't like to give it particularly during labor, because if you give opioids to pregnant lady during labor for for obstetric analgesia, then it can go to the baby and can result in respiratory depression in the baby. When the baby is born, the baby might not breathe, right, and which can be and can become asphyxiated. So therefore, if you are giving in obstetric analgesia, it has to be given fairly early, before early stages of labor, before the baby is delivered. Right. So therefore, that is why it is not used in analgesia during labor now. Very often now for labor, it is epidural anesthesia which is used, where only small amounts can be given, and which does not result in depression of respiration in the baby. So it has a duration of action of 4 to 6 hours. Right. So morphine is metabolized in the liver, so primarily in the liver, and the metabolites as a result of liver metabolism are excreted in urine. Now, one important thing to remember is that it produces active metabolites. So it produces mainly two types of metabolites: morphine 3-glucuronide, M3G for short. It's 80% is metabolized into morphine 3-glucuronide, which is inactive, but it also produces morphine 6-glucuronide, which is up to 10 to 15%, which is an active metabolite. It's very potent, and but it does not cross the blood-brain barrier well. So you have to, so although morphine is metabolized in the liver, right, you have to be cautious in renal impairment because morphine 6-glucuronide is a potent morphine, it's a opioid agonist, and then it gets accumulated in renal failure. But morphine 3-glucuronide has no significant analgesic action. Liver disease is not reported to alter pharmacokinetics significantly, but it has to be used very cautiously, particularly in cirrhosis of the liver. Again, you will have to reduce the doses because there is also shunting of blood into the systemic circulation due to portosystemic shunting, and the whole dose can enter the systemic circulation. So in severe hepatic disease, particularly cirrhosis of the liver, the dose has to be reduced because otherwise the same oral doses can lead to respiratory depression. Right. What are the pharmacological actions, that is pharmacodynamics of morphine? So in the central nervous system, main effect is analgesia. So it produces strong analgesic effect. And there is nociceptive pain arising from peripheral pain receptors, and which is better relieved than neurotic pain. Right, so that is why for acute pain like post-surgical pain, it results in better pain relief than for pain arising from neuralgias. And reactions associated with intense pain like apprehension, fear are also depressed. So that is why, because when somebody is having severe pain, patients are very distressed, and they may become depressed. So I said distressed, right? Not depressed. So they are distressed, right? They are agitated, apprehension. So that also will be because there is some degree of sedation. So patient is calmed down, and so that also contributes to the analgesic effect. And then it's also effective on various other types of pain, like a chronic dull pain or colicky pain, as well as acute sharp pain. And it does not, however, have any effect on other senses and consciousness, right? So like, whereas now general anesthetics, they reduce consciousness. It does not reduce conscious level of consciousness, but of course the patient is made very drowsy because of the sedative effect. So sedation is the main other effect that is produced. So drowsiness and indifference to surroundings, as well as to own body, can occur. And ataxia, apparent excitement, can also occur. And of course, if you give too much, then you can get coma, right? So therefore, in normal doses, consciousness is not affected, but of course, in an overdose, definitely coma and loss of consciousness occurs. It also results in changes of the mood, where, as I said, there's a calming effect. So loss of apprehension, that is, this agitated effect is reduced. And also there is some feeling of detachment, mental clouding, and inability to concentrate, right? These are all, beneficial in like a post-surgical situation where, the patient is in pain and he is distressed. So in such a situation, if you give a strong analgesics, patient will be calmed down and will go to sleep comfortably. It can also result in cerebral vasodilatation to increase the intracranial pressure. Some more actions in the brain. So particular problematic actions when we give are on the respiratory and cough centers. So it depresses respiration as well as cough. So that is why we use codeine as a cough suppressant, right? So we use now we don't want to use strong analgesics to suppress cough, because the dose that will suppress the cough will also make the patient sleep and even depress respiration. So the codeine is the one, if at all, which is used as a cough suppressant. And action on the respiratory center results in respiratory depression, which is one of the main side effects that you need to be cautious about when you are giving a patient to a patient for pain relief. It can, on the temperature regulating and vasomotor center, it depresses that. And and at the same time, on the chemoreceptor trigger zone, CTZ, and the vagal center, those are stimulated, which induces vomiting. So that comes as again an important side effect. So if you know the sites on which it acts and brings about, you can work out the side effects. So because of the action on chemoreceptor trigger zone as well as the vagal center, it induces vomiting. It has peripheral action on the gastrointestinal tract, where again due to mu receptor stimulation in the gut, it reduces peristalsis. And when the peristalsis is reduced, the contents are retain more in the gastrointestinal tract with increased water absorption, which results in constipation, which becomes a prominent feature when opioids are given repeatedly, particularly for cancer pain patients, when we give on a regular basis for relief of pain in terminal care. Another problem that you should remember is that it can increase the biliary pressure by effect on the sphincter of Oddi, where it can cause constriction, and therefore it can induce biliary colic, right? So therefore, better to avoid in biliary colic as well as in acute pancreatitis, because again you can have in pancreatitis also it can cause further aggravation by causing sphincter of Oddi spasm and cause biliary colic. Another effect of morphine is on the pupillary size. It stimulates Edinger-Westphal nucleus and results in pinpoint pupils. So pinpoint pupil, as seen here, is an indicator of opioid overdose. So one of the cardinal features that we look for in a patient suspected of opioid overdose is pinpoint pupils. So if a patient is having pinpoint pupils, then you should consider whether the patient has taken an opioid overdose. Some more actions on the neuroendocrine system. It enhances antidiuretic hormone release, and therefore urine volume is reduced. So there's reduction of the urine volume, and it causes sympathetic stimulation and can cause mild hypoglycemia. It has important actions on the cardiovascular system, and some of those are actually used for as an indication also. It causes it causes significant vasodilatation. So that is why it can cause hypotension, And because of vasodilatation, there is particularly arterial dilatation as well as some degree of venodilatation. So when the vessels are dilated, cardiac workload is reduced, right, because of the reduction in peripheral resistance. So that is why we can use it in the treatment of acute left ventricular failure. One of the main drugs that we use in treatment of acute failure is morphine, right? So we use morphine in a patient who has had a myocardial infarction. We use for relief of the pain, cardiac pain, as well as we can also use it for yeah, there are some questions. I'll answer those at the end. Good. Yeah. Again, just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put on the chat forum and I will answer those at the end, right? Yes, good. So whatever the questions, we'll take up at the end. It causes, I was talking about myocardial, a patient coming with acute onset chest pain, myocardial infarction. So along with the other drugs that we give to treat the myocardial, then we give nitrates for pain relief, and also aspirin, clopidogrel, statins, and then thrombolytics if it's a MI. And but for pain relief, we can give morphine. And in addition, if the patient is having cardiac failure, left ventricular failure, so sometimes in a patient with MI, there can be a significant element of left ventricular failure. That is also helped by giving morphine by the vasodilatory action. But of course, you have to be careful if the patient's blood pressure is low, because when you give morphine, your blood pressure will come down. So if the patient is having normal blood pressure, it can go further down. And if the patient is having some degree of cardiac, shock, cardiogenic shock, then that can be made worse by giving morphine. So those are the things you have to be careful about. So when you know about the side effects, you know why you have to be careful about. So some other effects, bronchoconstriction can occur by histamine release. So morphine can result in histamine release, and that is one of the reasons how it causes bronchoconstriction. So because of that, it is contraindicated in acute asthma, right? And again, you have to be careful. A patient who is elderly patient, there might be previous history of dyspnea, and when a patient comes with difficulty in breathing, sometimes it may be difficult to determine whether the patient is having acute left ventricular failure or whether the patient is having acute severe asthma, particularly if there is no definite history of asthma in the past. And so if you give a patient morphine thinking that it is a left ventricular failure, and if the patient happens to have asthma, then the cardiac it can be dangerous on two fronts. One is it can further increase the bronchoconstriction, so then the asthma will become worse, and then in asthma the respiratory drive it will be reduced because of the depression of the respiratory center. So that is why it is contraindicated in asthma. You can have retention of urine by increasing the sphincter tone of the bladder. So that is also another problem. So in elderly people, when you give morphine for pain relief, sometimes they can go into urinary retention. Right. So what are the indications for the use of morphine? As an analgesic, so we give it in, as I explained, in pain in myocardial infarction, pain associated with surgical conditions, both as pre-medication as well as post-operatively. So it is used as a pre-anesthetic medication. then balanced anesthesia as a adjunct to anesthetic, and also for surgical analgesia, that is after surgery, for patients as a analgesic. And remember, if you are working in as a house officer in a surgical ward, you should not be stingy about giving morphine to patients, right? Patient who has undergone laparotomy or whatever. I think regular morphine, at least in the first 24 hours, will make the patient, have a comfortable post-surgical period, free of pain. You can also, it is also indicated for pain associated with the trauma as well as in burns. But again, trauma, you have to be careful. I'll come to that, with the case history, as well as in trauma, like in head injury. So in head injury, it is again, you have to be very, you don't give it, because in head injury, if you give it, because of the sedation, you can't monitor the patient for level of consciousness, and then a patient can go, if the patient is having a cerebral bleed, that you might mask that, and then also it will affect the pupillary size. So in a cerebral bleed, again, pupillary size, you can get dilatation of the pupil if there is a cerebral bleed inside to one side, and that also will be masked if you have given morphine. So therefore, you must keep that in mind. So you don't give it, therefore, in the case of head injury as well. Severe chronic pain like cancer pain, again oral morphine is given. Then pain from kidney stones, renal colic, or ureterolithiasis, you can give it. So pain may be it may be valuable for diagnosis, so therefore should not be relieved by analgesic unless proper assessment of the patient has been done. That is, say for example, a patient who comes with kidney stones, and then you as a house officer, you may make the diagnosis that it is ureteric colic, but it may be some underlying, it may be even a abdominal rupture, ruptured intestines. So then that also the pain will be relieved, right? So therefore, until a consultant has seen the patient and made the definitive diagnosis, then you should not be giving morphine, because that will mask the features of the pain, and then a senior level person may not be able to make a definitive diagnosis. So trauma to thorax accompanied by cough. So again, so if once you have decided what you are going to do with the patient, then you can give morphine to depress the central links coughing, because if there is with all coughing, then further the pain comes, so then that also can be treated. Must always remember the cautions, the situations where you should not be using it. So how do you administer morphine? We most often, for analgesic action, we give it subcutaneously as well as intramuscularly. So the analgesic action occurs 10 to 15 minutes after administration, and when you give it orally, as I told you, there is pre-systemic elimination. So depending on individual variations, anything varying between 20 to 60% enters the general blood circulation. There are sublingual preparations also for quick absorption, and intravenously we give it for in emergencies, even like myocardial infarction and left ventricular failure. We give intravenous morphine, and then we can also give epidural or intrathecal analgesia into the spinal cord. So this is for segmental analgesia. It lasts about 12 hours without affecting other sensory motor autonomic modalities because the amount that you require is very small. And the duration of analgesic action is generally about 4 to 6 hours when it is given, except for epidural or intrathecal. In other modalities, duration of action is about 4 to 6 hours. Right. So these are the adverse effects. Now, most of the adverse effects, you can work out from the various actions. So obviously sedation, hallucinations, nausea and vomiting because of the action on the chemoreceptor trigger zone and the vagal nerve. Constipation because of peripheral mu receptor action on the gut mu receptors. Urinary retention. You can get myoclonus, respiratory depression, direct action on the respiratory center. Hypotension due to vasodilatation, pruritus because of the histamine release, and also cognitive impairment. You can get particularly on daily long-term treatment can result in some cognitive impairment. Right. So how do you manage the adverse effects? Because sometimes despite the adverse effects, we have to give the drug, and then if so, we'll have to do something to manage the adverse effects. So nausea and vomiting is a particularly troublesome adverse effect with whatever the method of administration. So here we give prophylactic antiemetics, metoclopramide or domperidone. So you would have seen when you were doing, surgical appointments, you have finished surgical, first medical and surgical appointments, haven't you?
Yes,
Student?
madam.
Yeah, yes. So you would have definitely seen, in the surgical wards, morphine being given. So there, invariably you would have seen it is given along with either metoclopramide or domperidone, which are antiemetic drugs because morphine stimulates vomiting. Then we can also, to address nausea and vomiting, attend to other non-pharmacological methods like avoiding large meals. This is particularly when we are giving, opioids for like cancer pain, terminally ill patients. So they are, anyway, they may not be having much of an appetite, but they are also, we combine with antiemetics as well as giving them small meals rather than giving large meals also is helpful. Constipation is another troublesome side effect, particularly when we are giving opioids for chronic pain. And so here it is again one of the indications for the use of laxatives. I think you would have learned in the G module. I think you finished probably. I am the one probably who did the laxatives lecture also, and I can remember telling that one of the indications for laxatives is when the patient is requiring opioids, particularly for chronic pain. So stimulant laxatives like bisacodyl, Senna, or osmotic laxatives like lactulose can be used for treatment of constipation. And then, of course, in these patients, when you are giving regular morphine, you can give them a high fiber diet, which will help in reducing constipation. Right, cautions. So children under 2 years, caution, right, again because of respiratory depression. Women in delivery and lactation, because again I told you, because you can have in obstetric analgesia, the baby can be born with the effect of respiratory depression and will not cry at birth. And baby has to cry at birth, and otherwise baby can become asphyxiated. So it's a problem. And same thing happened for women. In lactating mothers, if you give opioids and then if she breastfeed the baby, then it can enter the baby, and baby may actually again will be sedated. Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease and asthma, I said how they can go into respiratory depression and also bronchospasm due to the effect of histamine. Hypotension, particularly with intravenous whose blood pressure is low or even normal, you have to be careful about that. And then disease of the biliary tract or pancreatitis. because of spasm of the sphincter of body, and also you need to remove. Yeah. Then that comes on contraindication. So contraindications are the administration of morphine. So remember, these are very important. Acute respiratory depression. Any patient who may be having, who can develop acute respiratory depression, right? They may, obviously you are not going to give the patient if the patient is having acute respiratory depression, but if there is a patient who might go into acute respiratory depression like asthma patient, you won't give. Or for any patient, even a patient who is having head injury, you should not give. Acute attack of bronchial asthma, I mentioned. Paralytic ileus, again, because that will, because of the peripheral action on the gut, it can worsen paralytic ileus. Raised intracranial pressure, including head injury, because I told you the intracranial pressure can go up, again because of cerebral vasodilation, that also can contribute to raised intracranial pressure. And so head injury, the patient can have worsening respiratory depression, and also because you will be unable to assess the size of the pupil. So because of that, you should not give in that situation. And for that matter, in any condition where you have not made a definitive diagnosis as to why the pain is, you should not give it. So tolerance is another troublesome, problem or rather side effect that occurs with opioids. So it is, what is tolerance? Tolerance is diminished responsiveness to the drug's action, and which is seen it with many compounds, right? So that is, so with the in repeated administration, you give the initial dose, and then let's say you give 5 or 10 milligrams, and then after 2 or 3 days you can't get the same effect with the same dose, so you have to increase the dose. So tolerance can be demonstrated by a decreased effect from constant dose of the drug, or by an increase in the minimum drug dose required to produce the given level of effect. So that's how you identify tolerance, because the effect that you got with 10 milligrams, you can't now get, because patient says, still I'm having, earlier I had, relief of pain, but now with 10 milligrams, I don't get any pain relief. So the physiological tolerance involves changes in the binding of a drug to receptors, or changes in the receptor transductional process related to the drug action. So this tolerance is actually occurs well before generally receptor numbers go down. Right now we know that with constant stimulation you get receptor down regulation. So this is not due to the receptor number, but because changes in the receptor mechanism, transduction process, due to the drug action, not due to the change in the receptor number. So this tolerance occurs in opioids, and it occurs to all effects except apparently for meiosis and constipation, right? So apparently tolerance, otherwise it's good if it occurs to constipation, because that's a side effect that, that's a troublesome side effect, and if tolerance occurs to that, then that will be beneficial. But unfortunately, apparently for some reason, it doesn't occur with constipation, as well as the pupillary constriction also. Tolerance doesn't occur. The other thing is dependence. Now, very often students, confuse between tolerance and dependence. Okay, tolerance is different to dependence. Now, dependence is the medical condition of regular use of opioids, where when you can't stop the drug, because if you stop it, you have a craving for the drug, and then with the if you stop the drug, you get withdrawal features. So morphine, or with all the opiates, morphine, heroin, codeine, oxycodone. Oxycodone is a very frequently used drug, particularly in the United States. We don't have it here. So this is what happens with the addiction. So with opioid, dependence, they get, withdrawal features when they stop taking. So they get yawning, lacrimation, rhinorrhea, that is runny nose, salivation, anxiety, sweating, muscle cramps, muscle spasm, and intense pain. So that is why they go on taking it. Once you are addicted to it, you have to go on taking it, and then because of the tolerance, the amount that you take also has to increase. So that's why they have to spend more and more to buy the opioids. So for management of withdrawal, we use supportive care and also drugs such as methadone and clonidine. I'll come to methadone with under individual drugs. So these are the psychological effects and addiction. When you're addicted, you have both tolerance and dependence. Both things are there. So it's tolerance is one of the brain compensating mechanisms that gradually reduce the effect of drugs, right? So like when the body gets to get influenced by the reward system of the brain, so you become psychologically also dependent. And then of course there is physical dependence, because drug deprivation leads to the physical symptoms like pain, severe tremor, convulsions. That's physical dependence. And then you have the drug dependence, where drug intake is in order to prevent or diminish the physical or psychological disturbance of withdrawal. That is the abstinence phenomenon. So that is when you stop taking it, you have all the other features. So as a result, the patient goes on taking the drug, right? So morphine, the pros and cons of using it. The pros, that is, what are the advantages or what are the positive things about morphine. So it's the gold standard opioid, as I told you, and the mechanism is well understood, it's readily available and generally well tolerated. And another one is there is no ceiling effect. You can go on increasing the dose. Then the cons, that is the problems are, I told you that it accumulates in renal failure, it has constipation, nausea, sedation as side effects, and also then there are various misconceptions about morphine also. Right, so I'll come to the two case scenarios that I gave earlier, before getting into the other opioids. So first one, this 45-year-old man who underwent abdominal surgery, he was in pain, morphine given with domperidone. So do you agree with the opioid prescribed and the route of administration? Yeah? Do you agree with the opioid given and the route of administration? Yes, anyone?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. So it's very easy, no? Because I was explaining, yes. And why was domperidone prescribed? Hmm?
To prevent my vomiting.
Yeah, prevent vomiting. And I think if you asked a question, you should know how vomiting is produced, like, the stimulation of the chemoreceptor triggers on, not just, vomiting. So with the mechanism, you should try to give the answer, right? Okay, we'll come to the next case scenario that I gave you, right? This 23-year-old university student. So do you agree with the opioid prescribed here? Yeah, sorry, uh, do you agree with the opioid prescribed here? What? Huh? I I did not discuss this, I did not discuss this particular situation, but what is your answer? What do you think? Huh? Anyone? Have you heard of this case? Have you heard of this this particular because this was on this is on news and so on.
Madam, hello.
Yeah?
Madam, should it be analyzed whether the pain is vascular in origin before?
Sorry, should I?
They should have analyzed whether it is the pain is due to ischemia before.
Yes, that's right. So here, obviously, this patient had severe pain, right? But when you have a patient who is put on a plaster cast, I think you have done surgical appointments. Okay, so if a patient is put on a plaster cast and complaining of pain, what is the first thing that you must worry about?
Compartment syndrome.
Exactly, whether there is compartment syndrome, because there is some degree of swelling there, and with the swelling, with the plaster, whether it is a tightening of the plaster, right, with some swelling, so compartment syndrome. So in that situation, right, if you go and give a strong analgesic, patient's pain will go off and patient will fall asleep. But what will happen is the compartment syndrome will worsen and there will be permanent cut off of the blood supply to the distal circulation. And that's what happened to this patient. So by the morning, the arm was gangrenous. So any plaster cast, you have to cut, pain complaining, unusual pain after a plaster. If the patient is complaining of pain, the plaster has to be cut, right across to see whether there is compartment syndrome. So the lesson from here is don't use analgesics, strong analgesics like morphine, unless you have carefully analyzed the causes for the pain, because it might be a condition where it may not be just pain due to the fracture, but there may be some other reason for the pain, and then you might be masking the features of that pain. So you have to always look at the whether there is peripheral pulses felt and so on, and that can give rise to problems. Okay, right. So that's the reason for her gangrenous arm. So I wanted to give you this case scenario. Remember these before always you give morphine to a patient, whether you are doing the right thing, right? Okay, right. Let's get on to other opioids. Pethidine. Now, pethidine is a synthetic opioid. It activates opioid receptors, particularly kappa receptors, and pharmacological effects are similar to morphine, but less potent, and it has shorter duration in analgesia. So it analgesia, also sedative effect, as well as respiratory depression. So it's much less potent, and it has no effect on cough, bronchial, and gastrointestinal smooth muscles. So the effect of constipation and things are not there. So the word for morphine, pethidine, the US used the word meperidine, right? Meperidine, so it's the same as pethidine. So a mu receptor, it's a mu receptor agonist, and structurally, although structurally it's not similar to morphine, the potency is about 8 to 10 times less, right? 8 to 10 times less. And important thing to remember about pethidine is it has atropine-like effects like dry mouth, blurred vision, and in fact, pethidine was identified when they were looking for atropine-like substances. So all the anticholinergic effects like dry mouth, blurred vision are they are with pethidine. It has poor and variable oral absorption, so therefore we have only parenteral preparations of pethidine. It's extensively metabolized in the liver and produces again pharmacologically active metabolite norpethidine, which is excreted in urine, just like with morphine. So indications, it's used to relieve severe pains. Again, in the absence of alternatives, actually the use of pethidine is declining because now we mostly use morphine in post-surgical analgesia. And obstetric analgesia is one of the main, indications that it was used for, because early studies showed that there was no delay in labor in equianalgesic doses compared to morphine. But the recent studies have shown that there was no definite advantage over morphine, and so therefore, in fact, again now. Although it is still sometimes used, people are recommending not to use pethidine in obstetric analgesia also. It is sometimes used in pre-anesthetic medication, just like you use morphine. And as I said, because there is no effect on the gastrointestinal tract as well as on cough reflex, so there is not useful for diarrhea or cough. So adverse effects similar to morphine, but they are mild. Tolerance is there, dependence is there, similar to other opioids. Right, methadone is another opioid. The analgesic effect is equal to morphine in potency and action duration, but more effective in oral administration than morphine. So physical dependence occurs slowly, and the withdrawal syndrome is mild with methadone. Again, the users, we can use it for analgesia, and also methadone is mainly used for suppression of withdrawal syndrome. The people who are addicted to morphine or addicted to opioids, when you want to take them off the drug, we put them on, so in heroin abuse, put them on methadone. So it is substituted for the injected opioids, and then patient is slowly weaned from methadone, because even when we are treating a patient who is addicted, we can't, at once again stop it. So rather than giving, morphine, we give the patient methadone, and then gradually reduce the doses that are given and taken the patient off from morphine. Fentanyl is coming again now increasingly, gaining importance. So here, analgesic effect is about 80 to 100 times as effective as morphine with short duration of action, like in 15 to 30 minutes. And it has a rapid onset of action compared to morphine. So used in anesthesia, anesthetic or as anesthetic adjunct. So you can see if there is a rapid onset of analgesia, then that's very, very useful in anesthesia. So it's very lipid soluble, therefore easily diffused to the skin and mucous membranes and into the systemic circulation. So because of that, now successful transdermal route of administration is also very popular, and it requires 12 to 24 hours before serum levels stabilize when starting a patch or changing the dose. So there are these patches, the fentanyl patches, which can be used particularly for managing chronic pain. So recommended dosing is every 72 hours for skin patch, and some patients every 48 hours. Although you can generally 72 hours, if patients who have severe pain may need changing every 48 hours. So it's metabolized in the liver and to a lesser extent the duodenum to inactive metabolites. It may be used in renal failure, but you should monitor for evidence of accumulation. The disadvantage of the skin patch is due to patch small size, small increment of the dose is not possible. Now, when you're using in particularly, cancer pain, depending on the patient's degree of pain, we should be able to increase the dose, which is not possible with skin patches. And also long half-life does not allow rapid change of dose for patients who are having unstable pain. So these are the skin patches, so transdermal patch, and it is, put on the patient's skin. So these reserved for patients who require stable opioid doses, or for patients who are unable to take oral morphine as an alternative to the subcutaneous route. And so you have to apply to a dry flat area and choose a place where skin is not very oily and free of scars. And if you are, giving it for, this is very useful actually for patients who are particularly cancer patients, terminally ill patients who are unable to take orally, because then when the patient is unable to take orally, you can give it, you can apply the patch onto the skin to obtain good pain relief. Right, then codeine, it's methyl morphine and it's a prodrug. Prodrug means the drug has to be converted to active product in the body. So analgesic effect occurs from metabolism to morphine, which is mediated by the CYP2D6 enzymes in the liver. Much less potent than morphine, again like 1/10 of the analgesic effect. You may, this is the very often, actually in Sri Lanka, we don't have codeine as codeine tablets. We are having codeine in two preparations. One is as a combination, in combination with paracetamol for pain relief. You may have heard of a trade preparation, Panadine, which has paracetamol and codeine. But only thing is it has only very small amount of codeine, like 8 milligrams. Generally, you need about 30 milligrams of codeine for having pain relief. But when combined with paracetamol, small amount of codeine, so slightly more pain relief than with paracetamol alone. Then the other situation is as a cough suppressant in and also for milder pain. But we were having codeine containing preparations, cough syrups. But because of, again, people abusing it, because cough syrups are over-the-counter preparations, they were abusing those, and as a result, it had to be taken off the market. So codeine produces, again, less sedation, less respiratory depression and fewer gastrointestinal effects, and less addiction and withdrawal. But then I can remember there were features, they were, drinking bottles of codeine, cough syrups. So then had to stop the over-the-counter use of codeine. So codeine is metabolized in the liver by cytochrome P450 CYP2D6 enzyme. So there are a lot of ethnic variations in deficiency of the CYP2D6 enzyme. So this you can see CYP2D6, if you take the global population, this study says 20 to 30 million subjects have no CYP2D6 enzymes. So, and that means they are very poor metabolizers. So they will have no response from certain prodrugs like codeine. And then of course, the other in this, when the patients have a higher CYP2D6, where they have too rapid metabolism. So to the patients who are ultra metabolizers will need higher doses of codeine to get an effect, because maybe too much of metabolism. And here is a study that we did. In fact, I must tell you that this Praveen Taranga was a medical student. This is another as a student staff project that we did some time ago. And we found that CYP2D6, the variants which are associated with the loss of function of CYP2D6 enzyme was found in significant frequencies in our population, right? So that means some of our patients, they may not activate codeine when they are given codeine and will not significant analgesic effect. Like another opioid is tramadol. So tramadol is a centrally acting analgesic which shares both opioid and tricyclic antidepressant properties. So it binds weakly to the mu opioid receptor and inhibits the reuptake of serotonin and norepinephrine, and that is why it also acts as a have some antidepressant action, and so it promotes neuronal serotonin release. So it is placed at WHO step 2 analgesic ladder as a weak analgesic, and the caution is advised when using tramadol with other serotonergic drugs like SSRI, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or monoamine oxidase inhibitors, or tricyclic antidepressants, because it can cause serotonin syndrome, right? So that's about tramadol. Right, so here is a table showing equianalgesic opioid dosing. So here morphine, you can see the parenteral dose is 10 milligrams, that is like 5 to 10 milligrams. Particularly for our patients, we generally give 5 milligrams. And so you can see oral dose is much higher. That's because of the high first pass metabolism. Then you can see codeine, I told you it's 100 times less potent, so that's why it's codeine 10 milligrams is equal to morphine 10 is equal to codeine 100 milligrams. Fentanyl much more potent than morphine, so therefore you can see fentanyl dose compared to morphine is 0.1 is equal to 10 milligrams of morphine. Then the other ones, tramadol, again you can see 10 milligrams of morphine is equal to 100 milligrams of tramadol. And here are the equivalent oral doses. So here's the duration of action, opioid doses and duration of action. So you can see morphine when given orally, the duration of action is about 4 hours, and parenteral also again same 4 hours, like codeine 4 to 6 hours. You can see methadone 8 to 12 hours, right? And tramadol 4 to 6 hours. Fentanyl short duration, I told you, so 1 to 2 hours. And over this as a short key half compared to morphine. So yeah. Then opioid receptor antagonists. There are partial antagonists to precipitate withdrawal syndrome in opioid addicts like pentazocine or buprenorphine, or we have full agonists like naloxone and naltrexone. So naloxone may reverse the acute poisoning effects of opioid agonists, and they also can precipitate withdrawal when it is given to patients who are addicted to morphine. So here is a case scenario. A 22-year-old man, just you can read the case scenario. A 22-year-old man brought to the emergency department by the roommate, and he was found outside the room breathing shallowly, and breathing shallow. The patient is difficult to understand, intoxicated, slurred speech, drowsy. Physical examination reveals pinpoint pupils. So the roommate says that they have been drinking. They were both drinking at a party, and the patient, then he has lost the friend, and then he does not know what he could have ingested, right? So this is clearly a case of opioid overdose. So possible case of, it could be any other drug also, like any other party drugs, but things that in this type of a patient, for you to decide whether it is an opioid, these are the things that you can look for, right? So respiratory depression, these are the opioid overdose fix, euphoria, relaxation, tranquilization, low blood pressure. Whereas now drugs like cocaine will increase the blood pressure. So they are having hypertension, whereas opioids will have low blood pressure. Constipation, pupillary constriction is a very important sign. Hypothermia, drying up of secretions, and flushed and warm skin. So the triad in poisoning with morphine, acute meiosis, pinpoint pupils, Cheyne-Stokes respiration, and coma. Right. So these are the features of acute opioid overdose. So here treatment is naloxone, intravenous naloxone, and generally 0.4 or 1 or 2 milligrams should, and general dose of naloxone should not overcome 10 milligrams. So we then you can go on increasing the doses and up to a maximum of 2 milligrams generally. So can lavage and so on can be given with activated charcoal. Activated charcoal should not be given to an unconscious patient because it can aspirate, and then that can be the reason for death. So if it is done, we have to put an endotracheal tube and only do that. Diuresis, atropine, these other things can be done. Few things about cancer pain. So 30 to 50% of cancer patients undergoing treatment requires pain relief. And advanced up to 90% of patients with advanced cancer. So up to 90% studies indicate that up to 90% of patients attain adequate pain relief with simple therapies. One thing that you need to remember now is there have been, because of the early diagnosis and also treatment, now the patients are surviving for a longer period. So therefore, they can be susceptible to all the pitfalls of long-term opioid treatment. So therefore, we think that always, if it's diagnosed with cancer, you can start them with opioids, and dependence is not a problem. But you must consider whether it's a terminal ill patient or not, before starting long-term opioids. So in the safe use of opioids, these are the starting doses. I showed you some, comparative doses. Also, you can see 30 to 40 milligrams per day of oral morphine is the usual standard dose, and these are the other standard doses. Like tramadol, 120 milligrams a day. Like if it is codeine, like 180 to 200 milligrams of codeine a day. Yes, so start with normal release formulation given every 4 hours. That's what we do normally in cancer patients. And patients coming from step 2 will start, like I'll come to step 2 analgesic ladder. Just in a moment, just to show you have already learned about it. And if the pain is not controlled, then you gradually increase the dose by 50% with the subsequent doses. And then we also, once we achieve the pain control with immediate release preparation, then we change them over to sustained release preparations twice daily, and then give breakthrough for breakthrough pain. Immediate release morphine is given. So this is a WHO analgesic ladder. You know this, you have learned about it. So just to revise what you have learned. So you start off with non-opioid plus or minus adjuvant. Then you go into weak opioid plus or minus non-opioid plus or minus adjuvant. And then third place only you go into strong opioid plus or minus a non-opioid or plus or minus a adjuvant. So these non-opioids are the NSAIDs and paracetamol, and adjuvants are the other drugs particularly used in neuropathic pain, where carbamazepine, gabapentin, pregabalin, topiramate, valproate. I'm sure you have already, I think, anti-epileptics lecture was already done, so you have already learned about it. And antidepressants, tricyclics, SSRIs, you will learn about in the mental health module. So just know that these are used, but I'm not going to go into the details in the interest of time. I think so that's about it. So in summary, opioid analgesics act by stimulating mainly the mu receptors, and most commonly used opioid is morphine, and the opioid that is the opioid against which other opioids are compared. it's metabolized in the liver and 30% bioavailability when given orally and then renally eliminated. Pethidine is a synthetic opioid and less potent. Codeine is a prodrug which has to be activated by CYP2D6. And main adverse effects are sedation, respiratory depression, nausea, vomiting, constipation, dependence, and tolerance. Contraindications are asthma, undiagnosed pain, head injury. So we use opioids for mainly for acute and chronic pain and pre-anesthetic medication. And then these are the other drugs used for neuropathic pain. So please read your Bennett and Brown. The section is really good, as well as the student formulary. So if you know what is given in addition to what I have done here, if you additional reading should be the Bennett and Brown and the student formulary. So I think that's about it. Let's see the questions that you have asked now. Okay. Yeah. Okay. In pinpoint pupils in an overdose, does the patient elicit any vision problems due to reduced light entry? Yes, of course, they will have blurred vision because there is cycloplegia. So there is the muscle, ocular muscle paralysis also occurs. So therefore, there will be blurred vision as well. So, but of course, patient will be, in a comatose situation, so he or she will not be able to complain of the visual problems most often. What is the T-half of morphine? How frequently it is given? Yes, so T-half is about 2 to 4 hours, and generally we give it, at 6 to 8 hourly intervals, depending. But of course, we generally don't, try to give it on a regular basis, but guided by the patient's pain symptoms. So, so that then, because each individual patient's response to pain is different, so it should be guided by so that's why very often you would see it is prescribed as and when needed, SOS or PRN. So that's how we normally give it. Can there be significant respiratory depression and nausea and vomiting with intrathecal or epidural injections of morphine also? Generally, much less, because you are giving directly into the epidural space or intrathecal space. So the systemic effects are less. But of course, in medicine, nothing is hard and fast. So you can have, but generally much less. Since codeine is metabolized by it should be CYP450. Madam, can its concentration be increased or decreased by enzyme inducers and inhibitors? Yes, certainly. Yeah, it's a good question. Yes. So if the patient's CYP enzymes are induced, like for example by rifampicin or that type of or carbamazepine, yes, if they are induced, then yes, then codeine metabolism can be enhanced. At the same time, if the enzymes are inhibited, then similarly it can be affected. Are there drugs specific to mu1 receptors so as to avoid the side effects? Yes, so that would be the ideal drugs, but very often you would see that I gave you the the degree of action. So there are no drugs which will act specifically on mu1 or mu2 receptors. They will also have action on the other ones also to some extent. So because of the similarity of the molecule, those that bind to this receptor also will bind to some amount of other receptors also and give rise to side effects. How can we prevent tolerance? So that's a difficult problem, prevention of tolerance. So I don't think we have been able to do that. So that is why we have to go on increasing the dose. Even when we give for patients with cancers, we have to go on increasing the dose because of the development of tolerance, as well as in long term development of receptor down regulation. So it's difficult to prevent tolerance. Does dependency occur due to tolerance, or do tolerance and dependence is independent from each other? Yeah, actually that is a good question. There is it occurs independent from each other, but they are also linked. So tolerance is where you need higher and higher doses to produce the same effect. Dependence, as I told you, there are several components of dependence where you the main feature of dependence is you can't stop it, because when you stop it, you develop withdrawal features. So that is why they go on taking the drug. But otherwise, dependence, if you have just only dependence, then it just only means that to get the same effect you need a higher dose. So therefore they occur independent from each other, but one supports the other. So because of the tolerance, you will need higher doses, and then you go on having higher doses, and then you develop dependence to those higher doses. So you have to go on taking the drug. You can't get rid of the thing, because you have to go on. Otherwise, if you get rid of it, you will be eaten by the tiger. Similarly, you will be having withdrawal features. Are there drugs specific to mu to avoid the side effects? As I told you, the effects are. It's very difficult to produce drugs which are having specific effect on only the mu1 receptors. Most often they have effects on the others also, because as you know, that's all the drugs that we produce as selective receptor stimulants also have some amount of action on the others also. Any other questions? I think that's it. So I will stop here, and then I will upload the lecture onto the yeah, I think I have answered all. Yeah, I will upload it into the LMS. Okay, thank you.